Welcome to Principles of Ecology. Today, we are going to explore a fascinating question. Why do species live where they do? And what exactly stops them from growing infinitely? We will uncover the laws of limiting factors, which are the invisible rules governing all life on Earth. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how nature balances its resources. Let us start with a simple analogy. Imagine you are baking chocolate chip cookies. You have pounds of flour, sugar, and milk, but only two individual chocolate chips. No matter how much extra flour you add, you can only make two proper cookies. The chocolate chips are holding you back. In nature, plants and animals face this exact same frustrating situation every single day. They might have abundant sunlight and endless water, but if they are missing just one tiny essential nutrient, they simply cannot grow. Throwing more of the wrong resource at a problem never helps. Now that we understand the basic idea, let us look at how it was formalized. In the mid-1800s, a scientist named Justus von Liebig defined what we now call Liebig's law of the minimum. This law states that the growth and reproduction of an organism are not determined by the total amount of resources available, but rather by the single resource that is most scarce relative to the organism's needs. We call this scarce resource the limiting factor. Even if all other nutrients are present in massive quantities, growth completely stops once that one limiting nutrient runs out. To visualize this concept, scientists often use the analogy of a wooden barrel made of staves of different lengths. Take a look at the diagram on your screen. You can see that the barrel can only hold water up to the height of the shortest stave. In this case, the shortest stave is labeled phosphorus, and water is spilling out right there. It does not matter how tall the nitrogen or carbon staves are. The barrel's capacity is strictly limited by the shortest piece. Just like this barrel, an ecosystem can only support life up to the limit of its scarcest resource. This intuitive idea can be expressed mathematically. The formula you see calculates the maximum possible growth based on available resources. The variable y represents the total yield or growth of the organism. The function min tells us that we must look at all the calculated values inside the parentheses and strictly choose the smallest one. Inside, r represents the available amount of a specific resource, and C represents how much of that resource is required to produce 1 unit of growth. By dividing R by C, we find how much growth that single resource allows. The smallest result dictates the absolute limit of growth. Before we move on, let us see this formula in action with a concrete example. A farmer wants to grow corn. Each kilogram of corn requires 2 units of nitrogen and 1 unit of phosphorus. The soil has 100 units of nitrogen and 30 units of phosphorus. We need to find the maximum yield. First, we calculate the potential yield based on nitrogen, which gives us 50. Next, we calculate the potential yield for phosphorus, which gives us 30. Applying our minimum function, we compare 50 and 30. The smaller value is 30, meaning the maximum actual yield is 30 kilograms. Phosphorus is the limiting factor here. Let us look at another crucial example involving a freshwater lake. Algae require carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus in a specific ratio of 106 to 16 to 1. A water test shows 1,060 units of carbon, 320 units of nitrogen, and only 5 units of phosphorus. We divide the available amount of each nutrient by its required ratio. Carbon allows for 10 units of growth. Nitrogen allows for 20 units. Phosphorus allows for only 5 units. The minimum value is 5. Therefore, phosphorus is the limiting factor, restricting the algal bloom. If pollution adds more phosphorus, a destructive bloom will occur. We have seen what happens when a resource is too scarce. But this brings us to an important realization. Too much of a good thing can be just as deadly as too little. Think about room temperature. You might feel perfectly comfortable at 72 degrees, but at 100 degrees, you start sweating profusely and your body struggles. Every living organism operates on this exact same Goldilocks principle. Whether it is temperature, sunlight, or soil acidity, conditions must be just right. In 1913, Victor Shelford expanded on Liebig's work to propose the law of tolerance, explaining why species live where they do. Now that we know organisms need balanced conditions, let us break down how Shelford categorized these environments. For every environmental factor, an organism has a minimum and a maximum limit of tolerance. Between these extremes lies the zone of optimum. This is the sweet spot where the organism thrives, grows, and reproduces at its highest capacity. As conditions move away from this optimum, the organism enters a zone of physiological stress. Here, it can survive, but it spends so much energy coping with the environment that it cannot reproduce. Finally, if conditions push past the extreme limits, the organism enters the zone of intolerance, where death occurs. Let us visualize these zones using a tolerance curve. On your screen, you see a bell-shaped graph. The horizontal axis represents an environmental gradient, like temperature, and the vertical axis represents the population size or performance. Right in the middle, at the peak of the curve, is the optimum zone, where the population is highest. As you move left or right away from the center, the curve drops into the shaded zones of physiological stress. The population shrinks because life is harder here. At the far edges, the curve hits 0 in the zones of intolerance. This graph perfectly maps out where a species can successfully survive. This bell-shaped graph we just saw can be modeled mathematically using the Gaussian tolerance curve formula. Let us understand what each piece means. The variable p represents the performance or population size at a specific environmental condition, E. The symbol m is the maximum possible performance, which happens exactly at the optimum condition, O. The symbol s represents the tolerance breadth. A large S means the organism can tolerate a wide range of conditions. Notice the negative exponent. As the actual environment E moves further away from the optimum O, the squared difference grows, causing the exponential function to drop rapidly, mathematically pushing the organism into the zone of stress. Let us apply this formula to a real-world scenario involving freshwater trout. Biologists know the maximum growth rate is 100 fish per year at an optimum temperature of 15 degrees Celsius. The tolerance breadth is 4 degrees. A power plant warms the water to 23 degrees. We want to find the new growth rate. We plug our values into the formula. The difference between 23 and 15 is 8 degrees. Squaring 8 gives 64. In the denominator, squaring the breadth of 4 gives 16, times 2 is 32. Dividing 64 by 32 gives a clean exponent of -2. The growth rate drops drastically to about 13.5 fish per year, showing severe physiological stress. Let us look at one more example, this time with soil chemistry. A rare blueberry bush yields a maximum of 50 kilograms per acre at an optimum acidic pH of 4.5. The tolerance breadth is 0.5. A gardener mistakenly raises the pH to 6.0. We calculate the difference, which is 1.5 pH units. Squaring this gives 2.25. In the denominator, squaring 0.5 gives 0.25. Times 2 is 0.5. Dividing these gives an exponent of negative 4.5. The calculation reveals the yield plummets to a mere 0.55 kilograms. The soil is now too alkaline, pushing the plant into the zone of intolerance. We have covered a lot of ground today, so let us summarize the most important ideas. First, Liebig's law of the minimum taught us that biological growth is strictly constrained by the single scarcest resource, not the total abundance of all resources. It is the weakest link in the chain. Second, Shelford's law of tolerance showed us that life requires a delicate balance. Every organism has a specific window of conditions in which it can survive, bounded by minimum and maximum limits. Finally, understanding these optimum zones and extreme limits allows ecologists to predict exactly where species can live and how they will react to environmental changes, like global warming. You now understand the fundamental rules of resource efficiency in nature.